On August 13th, 1984, mythical legendary pitcher Satchel Paige pitches his very first complete game in the major leagues for the Cleveland Indians, where they beat the Chicago White Sox 5-0. And he did this at the age of 42 in his rookie year. We're going to dive into Satchel Paige and all his mythology today on Daily Sports History. Welcome to Daily Sports History. I'm Ethan Reese, your guide to a rapid deep dive into sports history every day. And today's trivia question to listen out for is, how old was Satchel Paige when he pitched his very last game in the major leagues? Now, Satchel Paige is a name that almost seems methodical. He's got countless stories that may have never been written down or no video or nothing to confirm. But it's hard to argue that some of them may be right, as he was a successful pitcher well into his 40s. And it would have been great to see what he would have done in his prime if he was able to play in the major leagues at the time. And that's part of his mythology and part of what makes him, interestingly enough, even his birth was a mystery until Cleveland Indians owner, before he signed him, had to go all the way down to Alabama to try to track down his birth certificate, which it showed July 7th, 1986, which Satchel Paige didn't even know for sure. As in when he was born back in the early 1900s, unfortunately, records for Black Americans weren't really kept, and all they had to go off of was his mom writing down his possible birth record, his birthday in her Bible. And that was all they went off of. So it was kind of a wide range of when he was actually born. But in order to sign for the Indians and for Vivek to get approval for it, they needed to know his age. And so that's when he went down to Alabama to find his birth certificate that showed July 7th, 1906. But as for many Black Americans at the time in the early 1900s, life was tough. They were living very poor in Alabama and struggling to get by. And he actually was arrested as a young child, as he was caught stealing multiple times to help provide for his family. And at the age of 12, he got sentenced to 6 years in an Alabama reform school for juvenile Negro lawbreakers. Now, this was actually a blessing in disguise, as it led him to his love of baseball. And Paige often said he traded his freedom to learn how to pitch when he was a young man. And when he was released, he joined several semi-pro teams in Alabama. His brother had also been playing as well. And that's where he got found and joined the Chattanooga White Sox, which was a minor league Negro Southern team, where he would make $250 a month, most of which he would send back to his mother. And eventually his contract would be sold to the Birmingham Black Barons, which was a member of the Negro National League, where his contract jumped to $275 a month. And at this time, he was still very young and wild. And in those 2 seasons, he had a record of 22-13 with 176 strikeouts. And the strikeouts was where he started to make a name for himself, as he struck out 17 in a game versus the Cuban Stars, which was more than any major leaguer had done previously. And 6 days later, he struck out 18 versus the Nashville Elite Giants. And due to the success he was having and the popularity Paige was getting, he would start being rented out to other teams to make extra money for both him and the Barons owner. Then in 1929, Paige would be offered $100 to play games for a Santa Clara team in the Cuban League, where he brought multiple other players to play with him. And this really angered the Negro Leagues because he was taking great players away from their teams. But he would eventually have to leave, as a miscommunication due to the language barrier caused members of the communities to be very furious with him, including the police and the mayor of the town. He was able to get out and came back to begin being rented out to other teams, to other Negro teams. And then once the Great Depression happened, the Black Barons disbanded. And that's when Paige really started to kind of barnstorm on his own. He was already being rented out, playing with teams here and there for a few games. And so now he was starting to do this even more, making more money than he could playing for just one team. And in 1931, he would join a Negro All-Star team organized to play in the California Winter League, which included both white and black players. And throughout the 1930s, he was still bouncing around from team to team, but this allowed him, again, to play against great players in the major leagues, and it really helped usher in the idea that black players could play with the white players in the major leagues, as he was facing them every now and then as they would play exhibition games, as most of his games were barnstorming exhibition games. And he actually got to face off against Dizzy Dean, who was one of the greatest pitchers in the 1930s. And the two teams played for 13 innings, where Satchel Paige pitched every inning, where his team won 1-0. And Billy Vivek, future owner of the Cleveland Indians, was in attendance for that game, saying it was the greatest pitching battle he had ever seen. And in 1936, Paige put together his own all-star team that would go on to play against even more great talent. He even faced off against Joe DiMaggio in the Pacific Coast League. And it's said that at this time, he was making more money than any African-American player, and even some white players. And in the spring of 1937, Paige was offered a chance to put a team together for the Dominican Republic, where he was able to put together a team for $30,000. And then, in 1938, he made his way to Mexico, where they would pay him over $2,000 a month to play in the Mexican leagues. This was the first time he actually got injured, saying there was a huge pain that shot through his right arm, that he couldn't even lift it. And some doctors even told him that he would never pitch again. But this was all he knew how to do. He didn't know anything else. So he fought his way back, and he humbled himself as only one team would sign him, and it was the Kansas City Monarchs of the Negro American League. But he wouldn't even pitch the whole time. He would end up playing first base a lot because of the pain he had in his arm. But he eventually worked his way up to be about 90% of what he was before and continued to pitch. And after a year playing in Puerto Rico, he came back to Kansas City Monarchs, playing with them for the next 7 years, where he'd play with a future baseball legend, Jackie Robinson. And on July 7, 1948, Billy Vivek, who now was the owner of the Cleveland Indians, brought Satchel Paige in for a tryout for this team. Now, I mentioned previously on the episode on Jackie Robinson, Billy was fighting to integrate Major League Baseball alongside Branch Rickey. And just a few months after Jackie Robinson appeared, the Indians debuted Larry Doby, who was the first Black American League player. And Vivek actually attempted to bring Satchel Paige in as the first African American player for the team, but at the time he was thought to be too old and had arm issues. But even in 1948, at the age of 42, which he found out by searching for his birth certificate, he signed his first major league contract for $40,000 for the 3 months remaining in the season. And on July 9th, 1948, he became the oldest rookie to debut in the major leagues at 42 in 2 days. But even at 42, he showed great skill, and he formed a great relationship with Billy Vivek. And on August 13th, in his rookie year, he pitched his very first complete game. And he was having a successful first year with the Cleveland Indians, as he had a record in the final half of the season of 6-1 with a 2.48 ERA, with 2 shutouts and 43 strikeouts. But after this season, Billy Vivek actually sold the Cleveland Indians, and they did not want to re-sign a 42-year-old rookie, and they released Paige, who went back to barnstorming to make ends meet. But his good old friend Vivek bought the St. Louis Browns and signed Paige right after that in 1951. But he started to show signs of age, as he was now 45 and ended the season with a record of 3-4 with a 4.79 ERA. But he came back the following year and had a much better outing, having a record of 12-10 with an ERA of 3.07. But the following year, he would go 3-9 and be released after not having a great season, and Billy Vivek, who sold the Browns as well. And again, Paige went on more barnstorming. He wasn't the pitcher that he was back in the day, but he was a great draw and a great personality, and people just loved to see him play. And then his good old friend Billy Vivek bought the Miami Marlins, an international minor league team, and signed Paige again in 1955 at the age of 49. And he would play 3 seasons winning over 10 games each season, but not being the powerful, dynamic pitcher that he once was. But he said he thought he could pitch for another 10 to 15 years even after that. And after he was released from the Marlins, he would bounce around doing barnstorming tours. But in 1961, he signed with the AAA team Portland Beavers, where he pitched just 25 innings there, still trying to make ends meet. In 1965, at the age of 59, he signed a contract with the Kansas City Athletics to play in a game versus the Boston Red Sox. Now, this was actually more of a publicity stunt. They wanted to have the old-timers facing off against the new-timers. And he was really just actually meant to sit in the bullpen in a rocking chair the entire game. But the fans eventually chanted his name, and he got out there and started to pitch, where he was able to pitch a few innings and not give up a run. But it was only that one game, and that was the last time he played in the majors. At the age of 59, still the oldest player to play in a major league game, when he took on the Boston Red Sox. After this, he continued to pitch in barnstorming tours to much smaller crowds, making much less money than he was, as he was struggling to make ends meet. He didn't have the career where he made a lot of money, playing mainly in the Negro Leagues, only getting to play 4 years in the major leagues. And he actually sent in a petition to the majors to try to get them to sign him, as a possibility to get them to sign him so he could reach that 5-year mark to make the minimum for a pension. And the Atlanta Braves actually agreed to sign him as an advisor. But the following year, 1969, they altered the requirements for the pension and brought it down to 4 years, allowing Paige to reach that pension mark. And in 1966, at the Hall of Fame induction of Ted Williams, he urged the writers to include the Negro Leaguers into the Hall of Fame, as they were great baseball players right along them, and there was no reason they should be kept out. And in 1971, Paige would be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame for what he did in the Negro Leagues and off, and for his career, the short time he was able to play in the majors. Now, most of the stats that we have on Satchel Paige are limited. A lot of the things we have are just from him saying it, so these numbers could be way more, but what we actually have listed, he had 125 wins, an ERA of 2.75 with over 1,000 strikeouts. He made 2 Major League Baseball All-Stars while winning a World Series his rookie year with the Indians, and won a Negro League championship in 1942. Is included in the Cleveland Indians Hall of Fame as well as the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, and is still the oldest player to ever play in a Major League game. Now, there are many stories that go around Satchel Paige. One thing we never know is how fast he actually pitched because of how long ago it was, but it's estimated he was one of the first pitchers to pitch over 100 miles an hour. As many of the Major League players that faced off against him said he was the hardest throwing pitcher they had ever faced, in a time when pitchers did not pitch as fast as they do now. And Paige will always go down as one of the underrated pitchers of all time, due to not getting the chance to play in the majors when he did, as he was really forced into the Negro Leagues, and he really upset them with all the barnstorming that he did on his own. So he doesn't have the stats that many players have. But he's still ranked number 19 in 1999 as of the greatest baseball players of all time by Sports News. And in 2006, there was a statue of Satchel Paige unveiled in Cooperstown, commencing his contribution just to the game of baseball in the Negro Leagues and overall. Now, sadly, we lost Satchel Paige in 1982 due to a heart attack. And it's one of those things that he was born in the wrong era at the wrong time. And I wish we could have seen him in today's game. We would have had all the opportunities given to him. Maybe he could have pitched into his 60s, and we would have all loved to see him dominate the game today. I didn't go into every detail on him. I'm trying to hit the ones that we actually knew about. He tells great stories. There's great myths and stories that go around about him, but we try to stick to what we could somewhat prove. If you like that, please leave us a rate and review wherever you're listening. It helps us out so much. And come back tomorrow for more daily sports history. And did you catch the answer to today's trivia question? When did Satchel Paige pitch his last game in the Major Leagues? It was in 1965 with the Kansas City Athletics, where he was 59 years old on a one-day contract facing off against the Boston Red Sox. At the age of 59, a record for the oldest player to play in the major leagues that he still holds to this day.